This is Hannah now to talk a little bit about curiosity and what we started doing about the problem that we observed. So as Chad noted, we were observing a gap in students' understanding of exploration, and that's where the library side of things really started to come into play, as we were noticing that students explored, but it wasn't in a very curious way. There was no strong drive behind it. And we began to wonder if part of understanding and filling that gap could be explained by looking more deeply at students' curiosity. So we began to explore the literature and learn about what turns out to be a science of curiosity, which is what I'll be discussing next. So first, I'd like us to begin to explore what curiosity means, or some assumptions about what we think it means. So I'll just give you a quick little 10-second break here to think about what you think curiosity means. Okay, so dead space over, radio silence, time done. So in this word cloud here, based on the OED definitions for curiosity, and I must say as a science librarian, I've never used OED for anything before, so I'm very pleased with myself. But you can begin to see that there are several facets of curiosity, some of which you probably thought of when you were thinking of your own definition for curiosity. For example, there's the component that gets at the minuteness or fastidiousness of some curiosities, or perhaps the strangeness of some curiosities. But the part that stands out the most is this idea of interest in, or desire to learn about anything. And when we look at how cognitive psychologists define curiosity for the purposes of studying it, they build on that idea and define curiosity as a desire for acquiring new knowledge and new sensory experience that motivates exploratory behavior. There are two parts of this definition I want to emphasize. One of the interesting parts of this definition is that it goes beyond an interest in knowledge, which would have been key to my own definition of curiosity, and it begins to get at the idea of multiple curiosities by also talking about sensory experiences. So hold that thought, we'll get back to it in just a minute. The other part that's interesting, though, is where it talks about curiosity being a motivating force for exploratory behavior. That motivation part is really interesting to me because that piece provides such a clear link to the learning experience. And it's true, you'll notice that if you've ever played around in higher education literature, that there is a lot published on the topic of motivation and higher education. However, much less is published on the link between curiosity and higher education. So this made us curious and went to explore the potential connections and influences of curiosity on the learning experience within a higher education setting. So part of how we began to do that was by coming back to this idea that there are multiple types of curiosity, or multiple ways to be curious, that curiosity is not a monolithic concept. The researcher and cognitive psychologist Jordan Littman has worked extensively on curiosity, and based on his research, we focused on three types of curiosity that we feel are highly relevant to learning in higher education. The first one I'll describe is interpersonal curiosity. Interpersonal curiosity is the desire to know more about other people. When I first became a librarian, my friends didn't say, "Oh, Hannah, that's great for you. You love to read." No, they said, "That's great for you. You can use your snooping and gossip tracking skills under the guise of information gathering." So that's an element of interpersonal curiosity. But aside from the snooping element of this type of curiosity, it can be also thought of in terms of interest in other people's emotional states and can be used to reduce uncertainty about how others are feeling or what they are doing. The second type of curiosity we looked at is perceptual curiosity, or a drive to experience and feel, to touch, hear, and smell things. And I believe this is a really interesting and important addition to our understanding of curiosity, particularly within our traditional higher education environment, as we think about students who may be more drawn to questions that involve an experiencing or a touching component, and how especially written research assignments aren't always designed to capitalize on that type of curiosity. The last type of curiosity that we used in our study is epistemic curiosity, or the drive to know. This type of curiosity is characterized by a love of information, problem solving, and conceptual knowledge, and matched most closely with my own initial understanding of curiosity, and really with our more traditional views of curiosity within the higher education context. We were interested in seeing what student preferences were for these different types of curiosities and whether we could use this as a learning tool. So to measure what types of curiosities our students possessed, we used questions from several different curiosity instruments to piece together our own 30-question curiosity instrument. We included 10 questions for each type of curiosity and administered this self-assessment to all of the students in Writing 121 last fall and this winter term. And if you've gone to the blog and seen the link there for the survey, you've now been part of this study as well. And if you haven't taken it yet, feel free to stop for a minute, go back to that link and take it if you want to. I'm going to briefly walk through how you can interpret your own results by giving an example of our results. Chad and Anne-Marie and I each took this self-assessment. We've actually taken it multiple times, which is also an interesting exercise, but here are our most recent results. Each of the questions on the survey can be answered on an almost never, sometimes, often, almost always scale. And those categories are scored then with a 1, 2, 3, or 4, with 4 being the almost always answer, 1 being that almost never answer. Because there are 10 questions for each curiosity type, 10 times that scale of 4 gives a maximum score of 40 for each type of curiosity. So that's how you receive the numerical score that you did when you finished taking the self-assessment. However, in terms of analyzing your scores, first I want to note that you shouldn't think of these scores as grades. Remember that the word often was associated with a score of 3. So if you answered often every time, you received a score of 30 out of 40. That's not a 75%. You didn't get a C. It means you're really pretty curious in that particular way. Also, we're not nearly as interested in who has the highest scores across a group, although it might be interesting to look at all of your scores and say that librarians who were willing to attend online Northwest and now are willing to even attend it online are very interpersonally curious, for example. But rather, these scores are meant to be used to look at how an individual relates to the different curiosity types. So in looking at Anne-Marie's scores in this case, my takeaway wouldn't be that Anne-Marie is the most interpersonally curious of us three, but rather, I would say that Anne-Marie as an individual resonates with the interpersonal curiosity type. But because her scores for all 3 curiosities are actually very close together, I would say she's multimodal and is curious about a lot of things. Chad, in contrast, is only curious about one thing. No, I'm totally joking. But what we see is that he identifies the most strongly with perceptual curiosity. And if you look at my scores, you'll see, maybe most of all, that I don't like to answer almost always. So that's one thing you can learn about yourself. But surprisingly for me, I actually scored the highest in perceptual curiosity.